Are you a thoughtful leader? Maybe you are. Maybe you think you are. Let's find out. I'm Mindy Gibbins-Klein. I'm author of The Thoughtful Leader and host of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. Thoughtful leadership is all about thought leadership that goes above and beyond. Thought leadership that is truly new and original, exciting, disruptive, maybe even groundbreaking. Because let's face it, we need to raise the bar. My guests and I are absolutely obsessed with finding truly original thought leadership, and I'm going to bring you so many exciting ideas and opportunities, things for you to think about, and chances for you to push your thinking that you'll be very glad you tuned in. So thanks so much for checking out Thoughtful Leadership and the Thoughtful Leader podcast. I look forward to connecting with you very, very soon. Welcome to the show. My guest today is the amazing thoughtful leader, David Key. David, how are you?
I'm good. It's so lovely to be here and speak to you again. It's been a while, isn't it? Since I had a chat about the conference, I think.
That's right. That conference is an annual thing, but it's surprising how fast the years go by, isn't it?
Well, I've almost deleted last year out of my mind already.
There were some good things. And, we can see your golf clubs here for those watching the video. Perhaps you've been able to play a bit of golf?
I'm pretty much 3 or 4 times a week at the moment. Yeah.
I say good, but you know what? It's work-life balance. So let's talk about your work, because I'm sure all the listeners want to hear about your expertise. You really are world-class in what you do. So I'm allowed to say that. We've got the show notes and your bio, but how would you like to describe your work?
Well, my work in the current moment is helping people who are suffering with their human experience. So think human beings out in the world struggling with life. Could be a range of presenting problems. And my thin slice of expertise is sitting and having a collegial conversation with them, pointing out that they're perfect in every way and that they're just living in a misunderstanding. And when that misunderstanding is cleared up, it's like anything. When we see truth, then problems seem to evaporate like a puddle in a heat wave. So I've transitioned over the years from modalities and intervention and techniques to being a conversational coach, sort of a psycho-spiritual coaching.
Yes, that is why I think people do seek you out. And that's why I think you're successful. You were uber successful with the NLP courses. So we don't want to discount that. And we don't want to discount NLP as a really viable tool.
That's
but
right.
Do I hear you saying it's not just about that? It's not just about the tools.
How can I describe it? If you think of all the tools and modalities, and there's over 400 plus ways of trying to help people, what I'm sharing are the principles behind all of that work. What's underneath that? When someone has a spontaneous transformation because they've had a conversation with a teacher, a friend, a mum, a dad, a coach, doesn't matter who the human being is that had a conversation with a struggling person, but if that struggling person hears something beyond the words, that truth seems to come out for them because it's inside. It's like freeze-dried, and conversations are like the water. And when people go, it's like a Homer Simpson moment, and that doesn't require any techniques. It just requires somebody to, how can I say, slow their mind down enough to be able to listen to what you're pointing to as a coach. So it's really quite profound.
It is, and so are you. And I hope I'm allowed to say this, but your energy is more grounded. I don't know if you've slowed things down or you've slowed your own mind down. I know you've had quite a few transformations over the time. We've known each other about 15 years.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I first probably sat next to you, the feeling I gave off was like I was wired all the time. Yeah.
So what's wrong with that?
Well, what's wrong with that is that people living in a feeling of stress don't, as a leader, for example, you're at the front of the room leading a team and you're living in a feeling of a wired mind, like always thinking, and trying to, using your intellect for survival purposes, you're missing a good feeling. Stress is like not healthy for people, and you can't get the best out of yourself if you have a busy mind. So I think what's happened to me personally is that when people see truth, when I saw that my experience of life was not anything other than a transient moment, and that problems didn't really exist, which is really tricky for the intellect to get. It's like, what do you mean these don't exist? Of course they exist. My business is suffering. My relationships are going haywire. What are you saying, problems? Of course problems exist. What I'm saying is that how we experience what's happening on the outside is improved when we understand that all experience is actually created on the inside. So the outside stuff that's not working, we see it for what it is. It's just something that needs to be done. And it's not a problem. Yeah.
Good explanation. Thank you for sharing that. Obviously, you've been invited onto the show because you are a thoughtful leader. I'm allowed to say that. And thoughtful leadership is really needed today. You know, it has always been needed, but I would say especially today. You're talking about stress, and it's not helpful. I wrote down, you can't get the best out of yourself if you're living with a busy mind. That's what you said. So once you slow down, once one slows down, one can be more thoughtful. And how do you see that helping society, for example?
Society? Blimey, I've never been asked a question like that. Well, look, here's the thing. If every human being on planet Earth recognized that they were living in a separate reality, their own personal thought-created reality, and that they could see the truth that the outside world does not create their experience. And let me give you an extreme example that came to my mind as I'm saying this. When I first got involved in this, I was like, well, you tell the kids in Syria who are being bombed in the moment that their experience isn't coming from the outside world. And then what I saw when I looked more deeply was, well, there's some kids that are really happy in spite of what's going on outside of them. How's that possible? It must be pointing to truth, that we all live in a separate reality, that we all have free will to use the principle of thought any way we like, and we can scare ourselves to death, or we can drop the thought. In other words, don't engage in suspicious thinking that we're having, which can be identified by a feeling. If it feels icky, then be suspicious of what's going on inside your mind. And when the world or society sees that nobody can make me feel bad, I could read my social media posts like some of the trolls we have on our adverts. Before I got involved in this understanding, it would really affect me, what people said. Then I saw that that's an impossibility. It's what my ego and my insecurities doing. I'm taking it all personally, poor me. And what happens is we get sucked down this rabbit hole thinking, well, I need to control social media, what people say, because it makes me feel bad. But when we see truth, oh, it's me. It's my insecurity. I don't have to believe that. What happens is it's almost like you can't get affected by the outside world in the same way, because it can't work both ways, Mindy.
It sounds very liberating, and
Totally.
and it is, because I have my moments. I'm not perfect, but I've been really blessed to have discovered this way of separating, internal, external, managing my state, being aware, being mindful. And you've written about this in your book. So I would love for you to talk about the principles in the book. Joyride is the book. And I've just seen it climbing the charts again today.
Is it going up still after 3 years? Oh, wow, that's fantastic.
3 years has gone by in a flash, like I said before. Yeah. Joyride is it's eternal. Anyway, you talk about it. You can explain it a lot better. Tell the listeners what the principles are and why they're important.
Okay, so the book Joyride. Okay, 3 principles, 1 life, 3 principles, infinite potential. Now, this was a story. I used it as a metaphor. It's a real life experience. But in 1993, I went on a road trip to America for the first time. I was like, wow, I was young. I was in my late 20s, I think I was, and free, no children, bit of money. So, right, what am I going to do? I'll get a Mustang. That's the American car. I like that. I've seen it in the movies, in the film Bullet with Steve McQueen. So I'm going to get myself a Mustang and drive down from Florida to Miami all the way down to Key West. Do that road trip. And lots of things happened on that trip. Funny things. For example, I bought my first ever scratch card and won $1,000 on that trip. I was like, didn't even know. I was in an IHOP and I showed the waitress. I said, does that mean I've won? She went, oh my God, I've never seen anyone win so much money. I was like, oh, amazing. And I had an experience in that IHOP where I ordered a full English breakfast and I said, do you have any ketchup? And she bought me this bottle and I shook it and the lid flew off and ketchup went over the whole restaurant. And I ended up going to the bathroom wearing a white T-shirt covered in tomato ketchup. And the guy in the bathroom was washing his hands, saw my reflection in the mirror and freaked out because he thought I'd been stabbed or shot or something. I was like, calm down, it's okay. I'm a hypnotherapist. I can help you, you know. And actually, I use that as a metaphor to say, what his eyes saw and what his mind did were totally different realities. Totally different realities. So I took all these little experiences on that 2-week holiday. And I was originally, when I signed up with you, Mindy, when I came on your training on how to write a book, I started and got 30,000 words into a book on selling with NLP. But there was something icky about it. It just didn't feel right. So I dropped it. And I was like, oh, man, this book's never going to come out. I think it must have taken about 10 years because I sat on the sofa. It was October the 14th. It was, I don't know, about a year before the book came out. So that would have been 2016, 17. And literally the book downloaded from nowhere in about 10 seconds. I had the whole structure and everything I wanted to do, and then it was just a matter of getting it out. And I've been so fortunate that all I'm doing is sharing what I see about an understanding that's been around since time began, that we're all one human family living in a separate reality with 3 fundamental principles that are driving our experience. I had a Facebook Live this morning and someone asked a question. I said, look, the best way to describe it, as I understand it from the man that articulated and saw that there were 3 principles behind the experience, I recommend his books as well in here. Sydney Banks, his name was. And he described these 3 principles. He said, look, when people and human beings see that their experience, is created via these 3 principles of mind, mind being human beings need this universal energy, this sort of invisible life force energy. Like if you speak to a doctor, what's the difference between someone lying on a slab and a human being that's having the conversation with you? And he said, well, the same physiologically, but the person lying in the morgue doesn't have any life force energy. So human beings, number one, said, well, we all need that. We all need that principle of life force energy, a spiritual energy, you could say, that never dies, is always there, always has been, always will be. And we're part of that. And then he saw that, or as I understood it, it's like human beings have thought, and it comes in and it goes. And that's a principle. Without it, you don't have a bad day or a good day. So we have thought, and we have this life force energy. These 2 principles working in harmony need one more principle to bring everything alive. And that is the principle of consciousness, or another way of describing it are the senses. So when we have thought and we're alive and we're conscious, like the elements, on the periodic table, you combine H2O, hydrogen and oxygen together, you get a compound and it's called water. Well, human beings, when they combine mind, consciousness, and thought together, they get a compound, and the compound is their human experience. Healthy compounds would be joy, happiness, peaceful mind, living in the moment, appreciation, gratitude. And unhealthy compounds, because it's your choice as a human being, would be combining all these thoughts and having unhealthy thinking, which would be sadness and guilt and anger and jealousy, those sort of things. And what I didn't see until I came across this understanding was that human beings had a free will to be able to feed their unhealthy thinking.
Right. Yeah.
Or not.
Yeah. I mean, when we hear you speak, when I hear you speak, I picture the Matrix. And, we have free will to, pop the pill or, which
Well,
one.
that's true.
Yeah.
We do. It's a lovely metaphor, isn't it? I watch The Matrix now, and I'm like, man, the people that wrote this were enlightened. It's just a beautiful metaphor for the human experience.
Yep.
We are all living in heaven on earth or hell on earth.
Yep. Whichever reality we choose.
Yeah. But unfortunately, I mean, the purpose of the book was to help point that out and see if someone could see it themselves, because you can't put the information in. You read the book, and hopefully the book stimulates that, that freeze-dried wisdom coming out,
I love that image. And the book, Joyride, it's such a simple read, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I mean, you've simplified the principles, you've kept it short, because nobody wants a thick tome nowadays that's like a textbook, and it's done well. Every time I see it in the charts, I think, well done, David, because that's more lives that are being impacted and more people being helped. So
and that's the whole point, isn't it, of being a thoughtful leader? Isn't that what we want to do? We're in these positions because we want to impact the world in a positive way.
Not everybody has evolved to be able to think of themselves in that way, a kind of vehicle for love and compassion, support. And that's, we have the choice to respond with compassion, and that's what we're able to do as humans. I do think some animals, mammals in particular, have some of these capabilities. But, being thoughtful is a choice, as I'm fond of saying. Yeah. And it's also, if you picture kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if there are certain basic needs that are unmet, it's really hard to be a thoughtful leader. So I think what you said is that is what we do. That is what we can do. And, it's great if we can get ourselves into that place. Funny enough, I have to ask you what you think about this. We get lots of people talking about helping others. There's been discussions in my shows about, women who give and give and give and don't think about themselves. But when you are focused on someone else, isn't it true that you forget about your own problems?
Well, I find it one of the best ways to get myself off my mind is to be present and in service to another human being. And then those poor me thoughts that I have in the moment about, I'm really tired or whatever it might be, it's too tough, I'll never have any time for golf, they go away, which proves that all human experience is coming from thought in the moment. And if you take yourself off the table, in other words, because when we daydream, when we're thinking about ourselves, we're never present, because you can't be present and thinking about yourself at the same time. Often we're ruminating about what happened yesterday, or we're worried about what's coming tomorrow. And what I've seen with the last year in the pandemic, for example, is that human beings are pretty poor at predicting the future. We are, right? No one saw it. I haven't met anyone that went, in 2019 in August, I had this thought that we're going to not have any pretty much freedoms for the following year because there's going to be a global pandemic. No one really saw it coming.
So no one had the 2020 vision.
No, well, they didn't. But what's fascinating is that is proof that we can't see what's around the corner. So why spend all our time in our heads trying to make the future change so that we feel better about today?
Well, we're conditioned for some reason.
Yes. Yeah.
And, you may want to expand on that or talk about something different. I mean, the conditioning is interesting, but it's still in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. But we're living from an outdated map. Yeah. So we'll be navigating life based on how we formed our perception of what reality is. And it's not the truth. It's just a snapshot in time. My childhood created my personality, absolutely. But there was a lot of stuff in my childhood, like everybody else on planet Earth, that wasn't so pleasant, right? That doesn't define me, but it did. 4 years. I blamed the world, my family, my mother, poor her. I mean, when I came to this understanding, I saw the innocence in my misunderstanding about her as a mother, and I suddenly felt compassion and love for my mother for the first time. Go figure. Why? Because I was full of judgment because of the past. And I hadn't seen that the past doesn't exist. It's just a memory. So I was living my life from a memory, an outdated map, Mindy.
I really appreciate you sharing that personal story. And I think a lot of our listeners might relate to it. There are all sorts of areas where, our thoughts and our perceptions and judgments are not serving us. So what can the listeners do? Let's see if you can give people some practical tips. The first thing would be go buy the book Joyride, and then read all about it. What else?
Well, I'm hoping if they read Joyride, they'll get affected and start to see when a human being is in an icky feeling, they're off. All that's happened is they just had a drop in their mood. And when we have a low mood, I would suggest it's not a doing, but you mentioned the word awareness. It's just being aware, low mood thinking is not a time to be making a decision or leading or doing anything from that space. And also be curious, like the weather, like right now, you could say the mood of the weather is dark and down. When the mood is up, the clouds part, the sky reveals itself, the sun shines through, and you're in a different mood or a different form of weather. So human beings are like a weather system. So if somebody is struggling and they're in a leadership role and they're having a bad day, lighten up, go for a walk, play golf. I have more insights playing golf about my business and make more money on the golf course because of these beautiful ideas that come from nowhere, from this universal intelligence. I need to do that with my business. It happened at the beginning of the pandemic because most of my revenue was coming from in-room trainings. And we pivoted into a 7-figure business, literally in 12 months during a pandemic, and 40,000 new customers. How the hell did that happen? Well, it happened because I didn't get insecure and freak out. I knew something would come to mind, and it happened by I was putting in the back garden.
In the back garden.
Yeah, but we're in lockdown, so I couldn't actually go and play golf. But I said, I got to keep practicing. Something will come to mind. And one day out of the blue, I know, I'll speak to this guy, formed a business relationship, and boom, we're on fire at the moment. Now, that had nothing to do with my intellect and everything to do with a new thought that came out of nowhere. Phone this guy. It wasn't in the agenda. It just came from nowhere. And we formed a partnership. So that would be just be aware, low moods, and be really suspicious of any thinking you're having when you're down.
Brilliant, because everybody can take that and run with it and act on it or not act, which is what you're saying. Don't act if you're in that low mood. I will remember that as well. I appreciate it so much. I appreciate you for being on the show. How can people find you? What's the best place for people to find you, David?
Well, davidkey.com. So David and then doorkey.com is the website. We're updating that. That'll be updated probably in the next 10 days, 2 weeks.
This is evergreen, this podcast.
Oh, okay. By the time you're watching this, the new website will be there. There's a 1-hour complimentary webinar where I talk about old school and the discoveries I made. It's 4 discoveries that help me grow my practice and my business that could be useful for people. And there is an offer as well. At the end of that, if people are interested, they can join me for more trainings and hang out with me. And that's the best way.
Fabulous. Well, I've enjoyed hanging out with you today, David Key. And yeah, you do unlock a lot of wisdom. So we appreciate that. And just have another brilliant thought or many. And thanks for sharing with us today.
Oh, you're welcome, Mindy. And thank you for inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And when you have change yourself, you go through a change, you don't always see it. So you pointing out that I'm different is, I take that as a compliment because I know that I've slowed down since we first met. So take it easy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Thoughtful Leader, and I hope it's inspired you to be more thoughtful as a leader in your business. Please consider subscribing and leaving a review. An important question for you. Do you want to create a culture of thought leadership in your organization? My best-selling book, The Thoughtful Leader, is available now on Amazon and many other sites in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats. Please visit www.mindygk.com for more great content. That's www.mindygk.com. Speak to you again soon.